There are people who don't actually live their lives. They stand in line for years, waiting for a new version to arrive that somehow never does. Think about it this way. They treat their own existence like an infinite preview for a movie that's never going to be released. There's a dress in the closet with the tag still on from 14 months ago. There are 17 versions of the plan saved on their phone. They're halfway through their 5th self-development course of the year, surrounded by books called things like Start Now and the 5-Second Rule, none of which they've finished. And let's be honest about what's actually happening here. They aren't waiting for the right moment. They're waiting for permission. Permission to exist fully. Permission to begin. Permission that no one is ever going to give them, because it was never anyone else's to give. This isn't procrastination. Procrastination is avoiding a task. This is something with a different architecture entirely. This is a full-time job called getting ready, designed, however unconsciously, to eliminate the terrifying risk of actually beginning. Because as long as they're preparing, they can't fail. But they also can't breathe. Psychologists call this the Deferred Life Syndrome, a deep, often unconscious belief that real life, full life, the life they actually want, will begin once certain conditions are met. Once they lose the weight. Once they pay off the debt. Once they finish the course. Once they feel ready. The conditions keep shifting, of course, because the conditions were never really the point. Picture someone who opens LinkedIn every morning, scrolls, finds something interesting, closes the tab, not because the job isn't right, because it isn't time yet. They need one more certification first, one more month of preparation, one more version of themselves before they're qualified to try. And here's what's strange. This person is not idle. They're incredibly active. They're studying, planning, researching, preparing. All of it happening in the space of before the line where real life begins. Where does it come from? The answer, as it almost always is in psychology, runs back to childhood. Not because childhood is something to blame, but because that's where the brain writes its earliest and most durable code about how the world works. Many of these people grew up in environments of conditional approval, not abusive, not traumatic in obvious ways. Just atmospheres where love and praise were something you earned, where good enough meant good result, not good effort, where the phrase, "when you're older then," was repeated so many times it became a belief. I'm not quite there yet. The real thing starts later. Research by psychologist Carol Dweck at Stanford University showed that children praised for outcomes, rather than effort, gradually begin avoiding new challenges. Not out of laziness, but because every attempt carries the risk of failure. And failure means losing the value they've worked so hard to accumulate. Dweck called this a fixed mindset, and it lays the foundation for deferred life patterns the way concrete lays a foundation for a house. But here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. These people are often the most self-aware people in any room. They've read the books. They know about comfort zones. They can articulate their own patterns with the precision of a therapist. And they still wait. Because understanding a mechanism and having permission to use it are two completely different things. Because somewhere very deep, the belief lives. I'm not quite worthy of starting yet. Not because I'm broken, just not ready enough. A little more preparation. A little more becoming. Therapists sometimes call this protective hesitation. A state in which inaction paradoxically keeps a person safe. Safe from what? From colliding with reality. As long as they haven't truly tried, they haven't truly failed. The dream is intact. The potential is unspent. The future version of themselves is still flawless. And the nervous system, brilliant, relentless, always doing exactly what it was designed to do, treats this uncertainty like a threat. It doesn't know the difference between a lion in the grass and the possibility of disappointment. It just knows. Danger ahead. Stay here. Stay prepared. Stay almost ready. There's another thing that happens to these people. A parallel life. One that exists entirely in their heads. In there, they already started. They already became. They're already the person they're preparing to be. And this imagined version is so vivid, so detailed, so emotionally real, that actual action starts to feel almost crude by comparison. Here's the brutal truth about what's actually happening. The brain is a world-class con artist. It's feeding them the dopamine of a finished marathon, while they're still sitting on the couch picking out the right socks. The reason they don't start isn't because they're not ready. It's because the real version will never be as perfect as the one in their head. And somewhere underneath all the preparation, they're not ready to mourn their own perfection. The imagined life is clean. The actual life is messy. And the nervous system, given a choice, will always protect them from the mess. Neuroscientists have studied this, what some researchers call mental simulation reward. When the brain vividly imagines a desired outcome, the reward system releases a partial dose of dopamine before a single real step is taken. A study published in Psychological Science found that people who intensely visualize a successful outcome are statistically less likely to take action toward it. Not because dreaming is harmful, but because the brain partially marks the task as complete. It's not laziness. It's a system that's working exactly as designed, just optimized for a version of reality that doesn't exist yet. They grieve quietly. Not the kind of grief anyone notices, an internal kind. They mourn the life they're not living, the experiences being deferred, the version of themselves that exists only in drafts. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being cut off from your own life, not by circumstances, not by other people, but by something that lives in the architecture of how you learn to see yourself. And the longer it goes on, the more evidence the nervous system collects. Every day that passes without beginning becomes another data point in the case against action. See, they didn't start again. That must mean they're not ready yet. But here's the thing. Nobody wants to say out loud, waiting isn't neutral. It's not a pause. There is no pause. Every day spent getting ready is a day actively spent on the waiting room fee. The door doesn't stay open indefinitely just because they haven't walked through it yet. Potential doesn't sit in storage, perfectly preserved. It moves, it shifts, it quietly expires in the spaces between almost and actually. They're not saving their life for later. They're spending it on preparation, on planning, on a future that keeps retreating the moment they get close. Waiting feels like safety, but it's the slowest kind of loss there is. But here's what matters most about these people, and this might be the most important thing in this entire conversation. They're not waiting for perfect conditions. They're waiting for proof that they're enough, right now. Not after the next milestone, not after they become someone slightly shinier, but now, in this body, with this history, with these imperfect and incomplete circumstances. And that proof will never arrive from the outside. No credential, no achievement, no perfect moment will close that gap. Because the gap wasn't created by circumstances. It was created by a belief. And beliefs only change from the inside. Psychologist Brené Brown, whose decades of research on vulnerability and self-worth produced one of the most quoted insights in modern psychology, arrived at a conclusion that sounds almost too simple. Worthiness is not something we earn. It's something we decide. We decide we're enough. Not perfect, not ready, not finished, but enough to begin. That's terrifying. Genuinely terrifying. Because beginning means risking an imperfect result, risking disappointment, risking meeting the real version of yourself instead of the polished one that only exists in someday. But here's the paradox that people who finally take that step discover. Living imperfectly in the now turns out to be warmer, realer, more alive than any perfect version of later. An imperfect beginning is real. A perfect continuation isn't. They're still here, with tags still on their clothes and journals still blank, with plans that have been rewritten dozens of times, with a quiet, stubborn faith that one day they'll start. That faith isn't weakness. It's evidence that something in them still cares deeply about how this life gets lived. They don't need one more course. They need permission. The simplest and hardest thing. Permission to begin. Imperfect, unready, right now. If you're waiting for a sign, this is it. Not because this video is special, because you're watching it instead of doing the thing. The plan is a ghost. Stop optimizing it. Go do the messy, embarrassing, imperfect version right now. And if you're ready to stop being almost ready, leave a comment with just one word: begin. Subscribe to the channel. We go deep here, and I genuinely appreciate you sticking around.